Yeah, hello Jennifer. Yes, just for our audience, we are going to try to speak English. I know Jennifer is quite capable of speaking English. My English is not that well, but we are talking about the whole thing around COVID and some of the stories that's doing the round on the internet, on the media, claiming that it's a hoax. And then now with the vaccines, that's almost going. There's a lot of uncertainty in terms of, is it the right thing to do? Is this the mark of the beast? So I invited Jennifer. She's a good friend. I know her and Chad for years now. We met in the Vaal Triangle many years ago while she was a medical doctor. And she specialized in microbiology. And just later on, I'm going to give her the opportunity. I wanted to tell us a little bit more about what she's doing, but she's one of the workers that's on the front line busy in this whole crisis. Now, as I already stated, the reason for our meeting is videos that make a lot of claims about COVID, about the vaccines. And the reason I'm speaking to her, for us as individuals not knowing microbiology, it's difficult to differentiate truth and lies from each other. And because I know her, I phoned her and I asked her if she would be so kind to talk to us a little bit about the technical detail behind all these things and explain to us how it works and what's behind it. The second reason is maybe a biblical reason, Jennifer, why I want to speak to you. And I think everyone listening to this must hear the following. One of the 10 commandments is that we should not give false testimony. So if we portray or forward a video or anything, and it's not the truth, I think it saddens God's heart if we do that. The Holy Spirit is the Spirit of truth. So we want to get behind the truth around these things. And Jennifer, that's why we are talking to you this afternoon, Saturday afternoon. Thank you that you're willing to sacrifice a Saturday to talk to us. But I want to ask Jennifer just to tell us a little bit more about what she's doing currently. Thank you, Jennifer, if you can explain to us a little bit.
Thank you, Pastor Rulo, for the opportunity to speak to you today. So as you've said, I'm a clinical microbiologist. So that means I studied medicine, and then after I studied medicine, I specialized in the discipline of clinical microbiology and also infectious diseases. So where I work at the moment is in a very big diagnostic laboratory in Centurion in Pretoria. I studied my postgraduate at WITS, but as you can hear, it did nothing for my Pretoria accent. So I work in a big diagnostic laboratory and infectious diseases laboratory, which would include both microbiology, where we basically test patient specimens to try and see what are the bacteria that are causing infections, and then also what it is sensitive to, so giving advice to doctors what to treat those infections with. And then also in the Department of Molecular Biology, which is basically where we do all this COVID-19 testing, PCR testing. So from March till about end of June, July, when we were at the peak, what they said, that was basically all I was doing day and night. Okay. And then I also have the opportunity to not just work in the laboratory, but we actually also do ward rounds with doctors. I do ward rounds in ICUs where they treat these COVID patients. And I've seen what this virus can do to a patient, a previously healthy patient as well. So that's basically what I'm doing in my experience. And I've been doing this for almost 20 years now.
Yeah, I can't believe we've met that long ago. So, but yeah, thinking about that, let's not talk about that. Otherwise, we're going to feel, okay, so let's start. I think one of the first question is, some of the claims in these videos is people say that COVID is actually a hoax. It's nothing more than a flu. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Whether it's a truth, whether it's a lie, what should we make of it?
Okay, so the COVID-19 pandemic is caused by the SARS coronavirus 2. So it's not the first SARS. SARS stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome virus. It's part of the corona family of viruses. So the corona family of viruses is quite a big family. It causes or it infects different types of animals. And previously, before this SARS coronavirus 2 was introduced into the human population, there were only 6 coronaviruses that caused infection in humans. So it's not flu, it's not influenza. And this, although it's also a respiratory virus and it causes predominantly respiratory symptoms initially, that is pretty much where, unfortunately, the similarities between the two viruses stop. So if I can just start off by saying a hoax does not kill 1.6 million people. And as of this morning, the confirmed death rate worldwide for people that died from confirmed coronavirus, SARS coronavirus 2, was more than 1.6 million people. And it's actually infected more than 66 million people. So it's by far the worst pandemic that we've experienced during this century so far. The only previous pandemic we had was 2009 with the swine flu, which turned out to be relatively mild. And if I say relatively mild, it killed about 300,000 people worldwide. So if we look at this coronavirus, there's lots of people who say on Facebook and other media that it's just a cold, it just causes a common cold because coronavirus is not new, it causes colds. Now, it's true that some coronaviruses does cause colds. In fact, it was in the 1960s when it was first isolated, and there's two viruses that's part of the common cold, and it's probably the second most common virus that causes the common cold, which we all know, sneezing, sore throat, you feel miserable for a few days every year. After rhinoviruses are the most common one. But then in 2003, what happened was with the original SARS coronavirus, these viruses crossed the species barrier. In other words, it's not viruses that normally occur in humans and cause infections in humans. They came over, the original SARS coronavirus, I think, was from civet cats, and it got transmitted into the human population. It adapted so that it could actually transmit between people. And usually when a virus crosses the species barrier, the mortality is extremely high. So with the original SARS coronavirus, mortality was 10%. In 2012, there was another coronavirus called the Middle Eastern Respiratory coronavirus, MERS virus, which came from camels, so it crossed the species barrier from camels into humans. That outbreak has not been contained. So it still actually occurs. The original SARS coronavirus, fortunately, they managed to get all the people that was infected, quarantined, all their contacts quarantined, and they managed to contain it. So there hasn't been any cases since around 2004. The MERS coronavirus has got a mortality rate of about 40%. And if we look at the current SARS coronavirus, we're not quite sure what I think it might be pangolins. That was the original species host. But it's not 100% confirmed that it actually was transmitted from there into humans. The big difference between the current SARS coronavirus that we've got and those previous two that I've mentioned is the fact that in many aspects it behaves like a normal cold. So it's much more easily transmissible compared to the original SARS and the MERS coronavirus. It can cause asymptomatic infection. So in other words, contrary to SARS and MERS, not everybody gets dead sick, which is a good thing, because then, I mean, if we had now a virus with a mortality that had 10 to 40%, you would see full-scale breakdown of civilization all across the world. So from that perspective, it's mercy, I think, that it does not have the same mortality rate. But at the same time, if you are one of the unlucky people, and I mean, it's not to say you don't need necessarily to have underlying conditions to get severe disease. Normal people with absolutely no underlying conditions can also get severe SARS coronavirus 2 infection, severe COVID. And once it goes down into your lungs and it starts causing pneumonia, then the mortality rate is actually extremely high, and it is much closer to the original SARS virus, which is more than 10%. And in fact, there were some ICU units before where initially when the outbreak started, that once you ended up in ICU on a ventilator, your mortality rate was more than 50%. So definitely it is not a hoax. It's not a common cold. This is a new virus that's never been known by people before. So in other words, nobody has got any residual immunity against it. The only people currently that's got immunity are the ones who's already been infected by it. Um, We've got no immunity. As of today, there's no treatment for it. So yes, we've gotten better in terms of treating the effects of the virus. We know how to treat certain complications of the virus better, and that has actually improved the mortality rate significantly. But there isn't a drug, there isn't a cure, there isn't a drug that if you've got it, we give you this and it will kill it and you will be better. There's no cure at the moment, and hopefully, this was a few months ago, I would have said there's no vaccine, but the first vaccine was actually approved by the first government on Thursday of this week. So hopefully there will be a vaccine soon and we will be able to actually get this pandemic under control. But it's not a hoax,
Okay.
absolutely not.
Yeah, I want to. I read on one of the videos, the following statements are made, and I saw the one video. It said that stating wearing a mask is bad for you because it can cause neurological and respiratory damage. And I don't know why they say that. Are there any truth in a statement like that? You know, because I feel that pushes people in the direction of, no, I'm not going to wear my mask.
Yeah, you know what? Simple answer. If you have to go for an operation, your surgeon and everybody in theater is wearing a mask, and you want them to wear a mask because you don't want them to speak and spit and cough all over your operation wound. I mean, it might be a heart operation or something. And certainly those surgeons and those nurses, etc., sometimes neurosurgeons perform operations that last 16 to 18 hours wearing a surgical mask, and they certainly don't have any respiratory or neurological symptoms as a consequence.
Well, I
But
would
it's
hope so.
very easy. I mean, we
Yeah.
usually advise people who get sick with SARS coronavirus to go and buy a pulse oximeter that you can use at home just to monitor your oxygen saturation levels so that you can see if it goes into your lungs and you maybe need to go to hospital. And I've tested myself wearing a N95 mask, which is like the highest grade medical mask that we usually wear when we do rounds in ICU, with a pulse oximeter, and my saturation stays exactly the same. So no, there's absolutely no evidence for it. And what people must also remember, just speaking about the mask story, there's lots of these conspiracy theories, and then it would say, but the openings in the mask is so many micron meter, and the virus is this many micron meter, so it does not actually keep the virus out. We're not wearing masks to prevent you from breathing in a virus. You wear a mask to prevent droplet spread from yourself. So, in other words, if everybody wears a mask, we reduce droplet spread, and that is how the virus is spread. It's suspended in droplets. So, mask wearing might not keep a small virus of 1 micron meter out, but it will certainly keep your respiratory droplets to yourself, and then you don't spread the disease to other people potentially.
Jennifer, is that why it's the healthiest I was in years? Since I
You
didn't get
know,
sick this year.
this year, what is it? Interestingly enough, it's the first year on record since we've started recording influenza seasons in South Africa and doing surveillance. Whereas, I mean, we're now into the at the end of the first week of December, and our influenza season for 2020 has not started. It has not even started. We haven't seen influenza this year. And we saw that with all the other respiratory viruses as well. Now, it might be because of what we call viral interference. In other words, the coronavirus might have been so overwhelming that from an ecological point of view, it made all the other viruses disappear. But certainly, we haven't seen colds or flu or anything this year. And I think the universal wearing of masks certainly played a huge role in it. So I always used to smile when you travel internationally and you see people from Hong Kong and the planes from China, and everybody walks out with their masks, and you think, oh, and now I think what is it? It's yeah, it
Better.
certainly does a lot. Absolutely, absolutely.
Then another statement that they made was people with a hot infection um, with symptoms such as headaches or sore throat are contagious, but asymptomatic carriers are harmless. Is that true?
That's not true at all, unfortunately. So you're at your most infectious about 1 to 2 days before you develop symptoms, if you are going to get sick. And then usually within the first 5 days that you actually become infected, that is when your risk is the highest of transmitting the virus. But unfortunately, this asymptomatic component has played a huge role in terms of propagating the virus and helping it to spread between people, because it's easy when you're feeling sick to stay at home and not go out. But if you don't know that you got infected, and especially in countries where they did not mandate the wearing of masks, etc., you might have inadvertently infected a lot of people. And that's where the big difference between the original SARS and MERS coronavirus outbreaks and this one comes in. Because with the original SARS and MERS, it's you only became infectious when you were sick, and when you became sick, you became dead sick. You didn't just have a runny nose or very mild symptoms. It was like you became dead sick that you had to be admitted to hospital. So that's why from a public health point of view, it was easier to control those epidemics compared to the current pandemic.
My experience with these conspiracy videos is that they read a truth and then they build something else around this. And I wonder if this was not the case with the other viruses. You have to have a fever and you have to be sick to transmit it. But it's not the case with COVID or this current. I'm not even sure I use the right word, Jennifer. That's why I'm talking to you about
Yeah.
this. Um, so, but
But this
that's the
is true
reason.
for influenza as well.
Mm.
So you can have influenza, be infected with it, and be asymptomatic, and nothing happens to you, and yet you might infect someone else who might end up dying from it. So it's not unique to the SARS coronavirus that you might be infectious even if you are, not symptomatic.
Jennifer, I want to step off this topic and go to the vaccines. I think that's also an important topic. I don't know if there's something else you want to say in terms of the COVID and the whole hoax thing about that it's not a serious disease. Maybe I'm thinking of a question. Um, can you maybe explain a little bit what it does to your lungs?
Okay, so the thing is, it's not just a virus that gives you respiratory tract infection, it actually causes multi-organ disease. And it causes it through different things. There's some of these aspects that we are starting to understand, but not all of it. So people might have seen in the press they made quite a big thing about the fact that it forms small clots in your blood vessels. And that is why some prominent physicians have advertised or actually advocated that you take something like aspirin or something, like anticoagulant medication to actually prevent these clots from forming. But that is just one aspect. In fact, what is it? It causes what we call a cytokine storm. So it causes an overwhelming inflammatory response in your body. And some of those inflammatory markers we can actually measure in the laboratory, such as interleukin 6. And of course, then they use that, for example, as a target for treatment as well. That is where a drug that they call tocilizumab comes in, which actually blocks this interleukin 6. It is also why people will know when the trials were published about dexamethasone, a steroid, that steroids are very good if you have COVID-19, because what is it? It kind of like dampens this overwhelming inflammatory response, because this inflammatory response that your own body wages in reaction to the virus actually can cause organ damage and make you sick as well. And that is what to a large part contributes to the lung damage with it as well. But at the same time, we're now starting to learn more about as the pandemic progresses and there's more people that survive and long-term survival, that it can actually cause neurological damage. You might know that one of the most common symptoms these days that to actually know that you've got COVID is that you lose your sense of smell and taste. So you can eat burnt toast and not even know that it's burnt if your eyes were closed because you can't taste or smell anything. And that's part of that neurological sequelae or consequences that you can have. And then there's a new entity, what they're now starting to see, which they call long-term COVID or long COVID. And long COVID, they think at this stage might be an autoimmune disease. In other words, your body produces antibodies in response to this virus to try and fight it off, to fight off infection. But then those antibodies can start cross-reacting with antigens on your own cells. And for people that suffer from long COVID, it's not just that they survived the ICU stint or the hospital stint and actually then they're fine afterwards. There's been people now documented that's had symptoms for 3 to 6 months afterwards, which literally means it can, on the long term ruin your life. So because of all this, what is it? It's really if I can sum it up, it's a multi-organ disease. It doesn't affect just one thing in your body. It affects many different aspects of your body. And what is it? Even if you survive the acute infection, you might have long-term consequences if you are one of the unlucky people. So it's really for people who think they're not at risk of severe disease and maybe it's okay if they get infected rather than getting a vaccine to get immune against it. You don't know in which group you're going to fall. And certainly, as a medical professional, it's a virus that I would prefer not to get infected with.
Okay, okay. Yeah, so if I listen to it, it's quite serious, and I think maybe we are too. I'm not sure if it would be the right word, flippant with it, or casual.
Lazai. Yeah,
As I
absolutely.
must say, thank you very
Yeah.
much. Okay, so I want to move on to the vaccines, but could you maybe explain a little bit because it seems to me you talked about different. I don't know if technology is the right word. There are different types of vaccines available on the market, and it seems that a part of the conspiracy theory is about the working of these vaccines. Maybe you can explain a little bit to us about that.
Okay, so there's at the moment 58 vaccines that are in clinical trials that's being tested in humans already, and they work with different technologies. The reason why they work with different technologies is because we simply don't know or we didn't know in advance which one was going to be the most effective. And I can maybe just start off by saying, before I say how the vaccines work, it's an absolute marvel of science. But I actually want to go so far to say the fact that we've got any candidate vaccines that's been in production literally about 12 months after the virus emerged in the human population is an absolute miracle. Because if we look at RNA viruses, and the SARS coronavirus is an RNA virus, the quickest any vaccine have ever been developed before against an RNA virus took 12 years. So if it wasn't for this miracle, we might still be going on like we are going on now for a considerable time of our future. So there's two candidate vaccines or two groups of vaccines at the moment that's the closest to being launched and being made available and starting wide-scale vaccination. The first one is called the mRNA vaccine. That's the technology. So mRNA stands for messenger RNA. Now, messenger RNA are just like little post-its or little small instructions that actually in your body. So if you look at how a cell functions, in your cell, we've got humans or DNA. So we've got DNA. The RNA viruses have got RNA. That is their genes. Those genes encode for proteins, and proteins is how we function. That's how our cells function. That is how everything we do is protein based, if I can put it that
Okay.
way. So your genes code, then they give the little messages in the form of messenger RNA. That messenger RNA goes outside of your nucleus, so it's not in your genes at all. And outside of the nucleus in your cell, there's little worker bees. Those little worker bees are called ribosomes, and those little ribosomes get the messenger RNA, in other words, the little post-it note with the explanations or the instructions on it. It follows that recipe and it builds the protein. Okay, so that's the basic mechanism. So how messenger RNA vaccines work is because, I mean, it was unprecedented. It was literally within a month of the first COVID patients being recognized in Wuhan in China, that actually sequenced the whole virus and knew what the genome looked like. So then what they did was they figured out which part of that RNA codes for the proteins that's on the surface of the SARS coronavirus 2. And on that surface, there's a protein called the spike protein. That spike protein is what binds to my respiratory epithelial cells in my airways when I get in contact with somebody and I breathe virus in or droplets with virus in. So that's literally what binds to the ACE inhibitor cells, what is it, on our human respiratory epithelial surfaces. So what they've now done is they've basically taken the messenger RNA, the little instruction how to produce that spike protein. So it's only that part. So that is one protein. You need at least 25 proteins to construct a SARS coronavirus 2. So it's not the virus. Your body doesn't produce the virus. It only produces spike protein. So it's just that small little bit. They covered it in a lipid so that they're able to inject it. They inject it in your upper arm. The lipid, it goes into your muscle cells in your arm. And then it doesn't go into your genome. It doesn't get integrated into your DNA. So it doesn't change the human DNA. We're not going to 10 years from now look different because we got messenger RNA vaccine. It literally just goes to the little worker bee, delivers its message. Your ribosomes, the little worker bees, produce those spike proteins, which then get expressed on the surface of your muscle cells. Your body realizes that these muscle cells are now suddenly expressing things which does not belong there. It shouldn't normally be on the surface. So you start producing antibodies and also a T cell response. So T cells are what's important for your body's immune response against virus-infected cells. All right. So it's two things that happen. You get antibodies, you get T cells against those spike proteins, and when they injected volunteers with that messenger RNA, it was 95% effective in preventing COVID-19. And in fact, it was virtually 100% effective in preventing severe disease. So there's two companies that are producing these mRNA vaccines. That's the Pfizer one has already been approved on Thursday in the United Kingdom. The Moderna vaccine is probably going to be approved this week. They are extremely efficacious. They're some of the most efficacious vaccines we have ever seen. There's just one problem with it, and that problem is RNA is not very stable. We know that in the laboratory. So in other words, it needs to be kept at temperatures, the Moderna vaccine at minus 20 degrees Celsius, the Pfizer vaccine at minus 70 degrees Celsius, which means it makes it difficult in a country like South Africa. I mean, I've got one minus 70 degrees Celsius fridge in my laboratory. So where are we going to store these vaccines, and how are we going to be able to inject people in Uppington in the middle of summer with it, if they don't have a minus 70 fridge, and those fridges are expensive. So it's expensive technology, but I think what is it? It's like I've said, it's a miracle of science, and it's probably going to be what we need to actually stop the outbreak. The second type of vaccine is the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which is also imminently due for approval. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, the efficacy ranges between 60 and 90%. and that uses slightly more conventional technology. So what they've done is they take an adenovirus, not a human one, because there are adenoviruses that infect humans and causes colds, etc. But they take a chimpanzee adenovirus. Then what they do is they actually clone into this chimpanzee virus. So the virus is adapted so that it cannot replicate once you get injected with it, but they genetically manipulate the RNA of this adenovirus. And what they do is they clone into it just that little bit, which actually codes for the spike protein. So instead of putting messenger RNA that they inject, they actually put that bit, that clone for the spike protein into the genome of adenovirus, the harmless adenovirus. They culture these viruses at great quantities, and that is what they actually use for that. That is called why it's called a recombinant vaccine. So recombinant just means it's not a pure adenovirus. I manipulated it so that on its surface it produces that spike protein so that your body can form antibodies against it. And that is what they use then to inject in the AstraZeneca vaccine. So it's not your own body then that produces the spike protein, but they inject particles which actually contains this spike protein. So
Actually,
that's the two main ones.
okay. Actually, you mentioned AstraZeneca, and I know that there was one video that went around that said that AstraZeneca was fetus. They use fetuses or a fetus of some sort to produce it. Can you maybe comment on that?
Okay, so the problem with viruses, well, it's a problem if you're a virus, not if you're well, it's actually a problem for all of us. Viruses cannot replicate on its own. All right, so it's not like bacteria that we can put on a petri dish or an agar plate in my laboratory and they will grow. Viruses cannot grow on their own. They actually need to infect other cells, and then they use that other cells' cell machinery in order to produce baby viruses and to replicate, and in other words, to survive. So that is the problem with viruses. So if we want to culture viruses, we need to culture them in cell cultures. Now, there's different cell lines that's used in medical science. And yes, to an extent, that is true if they say they used, it was aborted fetus from the 1960s, where they got fetal cells from. But what we must remember, it's not that today they abort fetuses and use their cells to culture these adenoviruses. They have to produce billions and billions of these adenoviruses because they're planning on producing more than 1 billion doses. Remember, there's 7 billion people on the planet that need the vaccine. So yes, those cell lines originated from tissue of aborted fetuses in the 1960s, but it's not unique to the COVID vaccine. In fact, the rubella, and we know rubella, German measles.
Yeah.
If a pregnant woman, the big fear is a pregnant woman gets rubella, because if a pregnant woman gets rubella, that baby is going to be born with cataracts, the baby might be born with brain damage, they might be born deaf and blind. All right. So the rubella vaccine originated from a fetus that was aborted because the mom got rubella during pregnancy in the 1960s. And that was where they actually isolated rubella virus from. And the vaccine that is even today still in use comes from those original kidney cells of that fetus. That was how they knew the baby was infected with it. So it is not a unique thing. Many different vaccines, not a lot, but some of them like hepatitis A, such as chicken pox, rubella, I've mentioned already, the rabies vaccine, they are cultured in human cell lines. There's also other cells that they use, for example, that comes from polio vaccine. For example, they culture in monkey kidney cells, for example. But I mean, that baby or that aborted fetus was 40 years ago. So I think it's a little bit disingenuous to say that if you get that vaccine, you actually get injected with part of an aborted fetus, because those cell lines are grown in cell media And like I said, the originator 40 years ago might have been an aborted fetus, but today, 40 years later, millions of cell lines later, it is not related at all anymore. And yes, I think, just from a religious point of view, I mean, pro-life, yes, we believe abortion is wrong, etc., and that I would agree 100% with. But to me, it is just these anti-vaccine people that they would care so much about an aborted fetus from the 1960s, okay, a baby from the 1960s, whereas what I think we should focus on is actually the millions of children whose lives are safe today because we can use those vaccines. And if we, on religious grounds, say we're not going to give it, you're going to cause the death of millions of children with all kinds of different vaccines and with the COVID vaccine as well. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. It does. Jennifer, and maybe before I ask the next question, I just want to make mention of the fact that Jennifer is a born-again believer. They were very faithful in our church in the Wall Triangle. They are not. She's somebody I also looked up to spiritually, a follower of Christ, born-again, Bible-believing Christian. So that's her background spiritually. We walked a long road. It's not somebody I phoned and never met. We've come a long way. So I just want to make mention of that. Just a question in terms of the DNA, and some people say it would change the DNA, and I think it's because of the name RNA. I don't know if you just quickly will want to just, I think you maybe already answered it, but that is definitely one of the things that bothers people, is that it's going to change my DNA.
Yeah, well, like I've said before, if you understand how messenger RNA works, then you will know it is absolutely impossible. It's not going to change your DNA at all, because that messenger RNA that they inject does not even come near your own DNA. It does not enter the nucleus of your cell. So the nucleus of your cell is like the heart. That's like the center of your living. That is where your own DNA, your chromosomes, etc., is stored, is inside that nucleus. The messenger RNA does not even go into that nucleus. The ribosomes, the little worker bees that produce the protein, is outside of the nucleus, and they just give their message. Once they've given their message to the worker bees, to the ribosomes, they actually get degraded by enzymes. So it's not even that they exist forever in your cells. They literally drop their message and they disintegrate.
Okay.
So I don't use Snapchat myself, but it's like for younger people, and now I'm giving my age away. It's like a Snapchat message that disappears. It's like poof, gone. That
Okay.
is how. So it doesn't integrate in your DNA at all.
Okay. Now the next one is where we are going in the sci-fi direction, or maybe I should say the Twilight Zone. And that's where there are people saying that there's actually nanochips injected into you, and they say, this is the mark of the beast, and with 5G technology, or they are going to communicate with these things, and they are going to manipulate you, your thinking and your behavior, and track you. Now, okay, but can you comment on that? I don't even know if you're aware of that theory. Uh,
I think it's like you mentioned in your introduction, that people might just hear one little bit and then they take that and they build things around it.
yeah.
One of the vaccines that's undergoing trials at the moment is from a company called Nanovax. So nano, you can hear, they use nanoparticles, all right. But those nanoparticles, what they basically do is, so similar to the other technologies, they know the sequence of the SARS coronavirus. they take the messenger RNA just for coding for the spike protein. Spike protein's the big thing, because if you've got antibodies that block that spike protein, it means that spike protein cannot bind to the ACE receptors on your cells and you cannot get infected. So even if you get in contact with somebody, hopefully you're not going to get sick or infected at all. So what they do is they use that. They've got a very harmless designer virus that they use, and they use insect cell lines, not human cell lines. Okay, so they don't say which insects, but they use insect cell lines to actually culture and then produce these antigens in large quantities. And then what they do, instead of just purifying the antigens, just injecting a person with the antigens, what they would do is they would actually take these little particles and then using nanotechnology. So nanoparticles is just like the glue to stick those antigens together. So in other words, you don't get just small pieces of antigen. The nanoparticle stick it together so that you get a three-dimensional protein that they inject. And they think, I haven't seen trial data for this yet. I think they're only in phase 2 trials at the moment. But what is it? I think that this might actually elicit a much better immune response than, for example, just injecting purified antigen, for example. So that's where the nano thing comes in. But certainly, I think if we look at the speed with which these vaccines have been developed, all the different companies that are making it, it would have to be a conspiracy theory on a scale unknown to man to actually to put nano chips in to track us. Besides, it's what my husband always points out, they don't need vaccines to track us, they can use our cell phones.
That is so true. I made mention of that today also to someone. I don't need a chip there. We are already monitored via our cell phones. What I
Absolutely.
can, what I watched the video, and what actually happened is a company in America, the government asked them to produce the packaging once they have a vaccine, to package the vaccine. And the packaging has a chip in. And it seems like it's a chip that you can scan with a phone then, with a cell phone. So if somebody injects someone with the vaccine, they scan the packaging to know, say, okay, this person received the vaccine. So it's not a chip that's actually in the vaccine at all. It's just the barcode on the outside to track who received it. So I think that's misinformation, and maybe somebody didn't understand the technology behind what's happening, and that's how we get to these conspiracy theories. That's one of the reasons why I'm asking you to talk to us and not me, because there's many things that if I say it, will be half truths, and some of them could even be an outright lie because I don't understand microbiology. You told us a lot of very interesting things, and I'm thankful for that. So I just want to say to make the statement that if you receive a vaccine, that that's the mark of the beast. I cannot agree with that. The mark of the beast in Revelation 13, I think everybody listening should know this, is it will be a chip that will, or whatever it will be, so that you won't be able to sell it, buy and sell. It would be an economic thing, not a health thing. So I really want to say that I can't see any truth in that. You will have to make the Afrikaans sê ons 'n afleiding. You have to deduct something. You have to read it in there, but it's not what stands in the Bible. And now we are making the Bible saying stuff that is simply not true. And with that, I have a very big problem. Um, as all these theories prove, they are built around misunderstandings. They are making things up that is not true. They heard something, but they didn't understand the science behind that. maybe, I don't know if you want to say something on that, Jennifer, because there's a last
Well,
question. I
I
still
always
want to.
understood. I always understood what is it, the mark of the beast is going to be on your forehead or your right hand.
Yeah.
And the vaccine is in your deltoid muscle in your upper arm. So it's not quite the same thing.
Exactly. Exactly. A last question, Jennifer. Would you receive the vaccine yourself?
Rudolph, in fact, I volunteered for one of the vaccine trials and I got my vaccine shot last week, Monday.
Okay.
So I've actually already, yes, so what is it? And I wasn't sure, of course, I won't know if it is the placebo or the actual vaccine. But I have to say, the first day I walked into an ICU and I saw what this virus can do to people. Never mind everything that we know from our own friends and family. I mean, we've all been affected by it, and we all know people who's lost their jobs. The economic impact has been huge. The psychological impact has been huge. But the first day I walked in, saw the scans, and saw what this virus can do to someone, I said I would do everything in my power to try and make it stop quicker. And the only thing I could do, apart from doing my work as good as I can, is to actually volunteer for a trial. So I got my vaccine shot already last week, or should I say my trial shot. I'd like to believe that I got the actual vaccine, and I can tell you the injection is a little bit sore, obviously. But the next morning when I woke up, I had a slight fever, which started making me feel optimistic that maybe I did not get the saline, maybe I did get the real thing. I won't know at this stage, but what is it? So just on that point, in terms of side effects as well, you will read that people will have a little bit of a feverish reaction or maybe feel unwell for a day or two. There's no serious side effects in any of the trials documented so far. I certainly feel absolutely fine. But if you do get that slight fever, and it wasn't a high fever, it was just like 37.8. But if you do get that reaction, all it means is your body's immune system, your God-given immune system is working. So that means you're probably forming a proper response and that hopefully it will provide protection so that we can see the end of this as quickly as possible. So yes, I would absolutely.
Okay. Just another question. How many people have this been tested on? Can you maybe make a comment on that?
Okay, so the trial that I volunteered in has got 60,000 volunteers. That's just for one vaccine.
Yeah.
The Oxford vaccine has already had in excess of that people that were worldwide volunteered, and it's been tested on the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. All of them, what is it, have had in excess of 30,000. So there's by now been well over 100,000 people at least that's actually received trial vaccines. And next week, what they said, I think the United Kingdom is actually going to roll out the first of their doses. Of course, there's so many people, everybody needs the vaccine, that they will actually have to, work out tires and prioritize that the people that need it most or that's at highest risk of severe disease get it first. So similar, if you haven't watched the movie Contagion, I always said, watch Contagion, that you'll see there what will happen. And now I never thought we'll see Contagion in our own lifetime, real life, which is what is now happening. But there you will also see that like a lottery system about who gets the vaccine first, because obviously there isn't enough to give it to everyone at the same time. So they will have to prioritize, etc. But I think from next week they're actually going to start giving it to not just trial subjects, but normal people. But I wouldn't have gotten it myself if I wasn't convinced that it is actually a safe thing to get.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it's lots.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess if in 100,000 people, um, we would have there should have been some death of some kind of, and if we look at you, you didn't went through any DNA modification as we
No,
were speaking.
no.
Yeah, so no, it was.
So sorry, Rudolph, just to put that in perspective, when they launch a new antibiotic or a new drug on the market, the drug trial for any new drug that gets launched is about 3 to 5,000 patients.
Sure.
So a new drug gets launched with a lot less testing than what the vaccines have actually already gone through. And it's not the companies who look at the safety data, it's independent boards that look at the long-term safety data. And I can tell you from my own experience, you do get followed up quite closely, for sure.
Okay, so they are watching you.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's good.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Um, thank you very much, Jennifer. I think we came to the end of our meeting. But before we greet this, go our separate ways, is there something else that you would like to just say to us?
I think maybe what I can conclude with, we've all got COVID fatigue. We're all sick and tired of this. I'm sick and tired of this. But the virus isn't finished with us yet. It's not going to disappear on its own. So, yes, the cavalry is on its way.
Okay.
The cavalry is coming. If you're in a war and the cavalry is coming, you don't stop shooting until they come. So until we get the vaccine, until we get widespread implementation of the vaccine, because the vaccine will only work if we all get it. So until that happens, we have to keep shooting. So keep wearing your mask, try to keep social distancing as much as possible, and try to keep yourself and your loved ones safe. I think that's what I'll finish up with.
Okay. Jennifer, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it, and all the wisdom that you could share with us, the information. I would just love us to pray together before we go our separate ways. And let's pray that if I listen to you, God is actually working, helping us to get to a point where we can be protected. So, but let's just close in prayer. Dear Lord Jesus, we are so thankful that we live in a day where they can help us. This could have been so different, and all of us have been touched by COVID. And thank you for Jennifer and their team working tirelessly. This morning she was at work, working to fight this virus. And we thank you for them. We pray for our medical staff. We trust you, Lord, that you will give us victory. And we know that you spoke in the Bible about sickness and these things that will happen, plagues that will come. And we know that it's because of the brokenness and it's because of sin. And not only did you give us a vaccine against the virus, Lord, but you gave us the true vaccine against sin and death. You gave your life, and we want to say thank you. May you bless each one involved. May you bless our medical profession and the people working there. We pray that in Jesus' name. We also want to bless Jennifer and her family. Thank you that you protect them and that you keep them safe. Amen. Jennifer, thank you very much.